Hi, I'm Evan B. Howard from Spirituality Shop, and I'm here to give you a little introduction to Ignatius of Loyola and his spiritual exercises. For the next few weeks, you will be spending some time reading excerpts from Ignatius's book and doing some of the exercises associated with the book. Get ready. These exercises are not what you might expect. First, a bit about Ignatius. Ignatius de Loyola was born in 1491 in northern Spain in the ancestral castle of his noble Loyola family. He grew up acquainted with the Catholic faith through the influence of the local parish church and the nearby Franciscan convent. He was sent at age 15 to be trained for what was then called court life by the High Treasurer of King Ferdinand and Isabella. Here, Inigo grew into manhood with ambitions for acts of chivalry, an interest in fine clothes and personal appearance, and a desire for romantic encounters. Though not a professional soldier, he took part in military expeditions when needed. He was eager to distinguish himself in military glory. In one instance, in 1521, he convinced the other military officers to undertake an unwise resistance to the French. In the midst of the battle, a cannonball shattered the bone in his leg. Ignatius was taken to Loyola to recover. It took him a long while for him to heal, and while Ignatius recovered, he whiled away his time by reading. He asked for his usual novels of chivalry, but all they were able to give him was a life of Christ and a book of the lives of the saints. He also had lots of time to let his mind wander. He would daydream for hours about doing acts of chivalry and charming a certain noble lady. As he read the life of Christ and the stories of the saints, he also began to daydream about these stories. And he noticed something. His thoughts about worldly affairs delighted him at first, but then left him dry and dissatisfied, while his thoughts about the saints and performing holy practices consoled him and then made him increasingly joyful and satisfied after. And thus, Ignatius was drawn into a life of discernment and service to the King of Kings. He began to share his experiences and, as Ignatius called it, to help souls, teaching and offering spiritual counseling to those who would be interested. He took notes on what he learned and developed a set of meditations and reflections which he used in his ministry and continually revised. This was the origin of the spiritual exercises. In time, others joined him in this work of teaching, preaching, and spiritual counseling. By 1534, they made a commitment to become a religious order and to make themselves available to whatever task and whatever location the church might send them. Their vision was profoundly missional, and, reflecting Ignatius's chivalrous spirit, they called themselves the Compagnia de Jesus, imagining themselves to be a company of soldiers for Jesus. As the name was brought into Latin, the group became known as the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. The mission of the Jesuits took them all over the world from the moment they began, and their ministry and the influence of the spiritual exercises grew substantially. Today, the Jesuits are the largest single religious order in the Catholic Church, with over 16,000 members. The spiritual exercises became one of the most widely used guides for seeking God in the history of Christianity. I have seen these exercises used as a text in spiritual life among Baptists, Presbyterians, Anglicans, and Pentecostals. If we recognize that, of course, there are a few areas where a 16th century Roman Catholic guide would differ from an understanding of Protestant believers in the 21st century, I still think it is fair to say that the spiritual exercises are a contribution to the whole church. The work is really a guide for the people who are supervising the prayer experience of others, often in the context of a time of retreat. The idea is that the retreat director would have the material in the book kind of at hand as a loose curriculum. The basic structure and the forms of prayer and meditation would usually be the same, but the content and the timing of each of the exercises in the book, or that the retreatant would be doing, would be tailored for each individual. Thus, while the exercises contain a wealth of devotional material, in the context of a retreat, the person seeking Christ might only actually use a few of them in any given time. The exercises are divided into 4 weeks, so-called weeks, based on the idea that someone using this format would take a month-long retreat to complete the program contained in the book. Jesuits devoted a lot of their time to seeking God. Each week points our attention to different aspects of the Christian faith and then invites us to explore different dimensions, therefore, of our relationship with God. Along the way, you learn to employ a variety of different prayer practices. You examine your own life, prayerfully remembering what you did, what you noticed, or how you felt over the period of a day or a week. You read Bible stories, imagining that you are right there in the story. You imaginatively engage invented situations that stimulate you thinking about your relationship with God. And finally, you also just generally review your life in light of where you see God leading you at this particular point in time. This structure and these kinds of practices have helped many, many Christians from many traditions over the centuries to discover, to choose, and then to follow God's will for their lives. Over these next 6 weeks, you will be tasting bits from the exercises and exploring them in your learning communities. This first week is just a bit of introduction, getting to know a little bit about Ignatius, the exercises, one another's experience of all this, and one little exercise to get us started. In the weeks that follow, then, you will be tasting from each week of the exercises, one by one, with a concluding week at the end. So with that, let me conclude by saying a few words about the introductory section to the spiritual exercises called the Principle and Foundation. You will want to read this out loud to each other in your learning community, perhaps a couple of times, and have a brief time of discussion about it. Maybe you will want to do that before watching the rest of this video. My comments will make more sense if you do. My first comment is this: don't worry about the phrase saving our soul. People understood salvation different back in the 16th century Catholicism than we do today. It would take too long for me to sort out all the theological nuances here. Just notice that we are created to worship God, and that is the way we grow in our faith. Okay? That is the aim of our life, to give worship, praise, reverence, service to the one reality that is truly worth it all. The point is, and we all know this, that when we make the worship of God our highest priority, it is the best possible choice for our own lives as well. Right? Second, everything functions as a means to that end. When Ignatius speaks of the other things on the face of the earth, he is talking not only about things, trees and dogs and stuff like that, but also about careers, relationships, conditions of life, opportunities, and stuff like that. The idea here is to clarify the aim a life of worship, and then the means to that aim, how we end up living a life that best glorifies God in worship. It's the aim and the means to that aim. Thus, and this is our third point, as means, the things of the earth, our careers, possessions, relationships, and so on, can function either to facilitate that aim or they can hinder that aim. So that's the point, is to look at all the means to find out, do they hinder or do they facilitate this aim? Our task in this case, then, is to take notice so that we can choose the right things and make use of them insofar as they serve the purpose of ultimate worship of God, which is the best possible life we can have as well. Make sense? The idea, then, is to recognize and then to choose the use of my time, my relationships, my possessions and income, and so on and so forth, that will lead to the best possible praise, reverence, and service of God with my life. But to make that kind of choice, and here is my fourth point, we must become indifferent to all created things. Now, what this Ignatian indifference means is that even though we may wish to live under certain conditions with a certain arrangement of relationships, and we're honest with God about this, we recognize that our own wishes are flawed at times. And we develop instead a trust that God knows better. We proclaim our deepest desire and our greatest fulfillment of life lie in the sincere pursuit of knowing and honoring God. And then we set about to discern and to choose with all our hearts the most appropriate means to accomplishing that end. Make sense? Thus, in this brief paragraph, Ignatius sums up the entire program of the spiritual exercises. You'll see how all this fits together if you read the material for each week of the exercises with his principle and foundation in mind. The spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola have proved to be a valuable guide for many Christians over the centuries. I, too, can confirm its value. About 30 years ago, when I was in a dark place, I went through these exercises in search of help, and God met me in a powerful way. That season and those exercises marked a turning point in my life, and I can still remember my experience of some of those times today. I have used and encouraged the use of the spiritual exercises ever since. And all the best to you as you pursue the end for which you were created.